Welcome to the Plenty of Positivity podcast. I am your host, Courtney Beck, and today we have a very special guest, Meg Seng. Meg is an AD Connection mentor. She's an adjunct professor at Eastern Michigan University, and she's an executive director at the Academy for Sport Leadership. Meg has garnered top statewide awards, including the Michigan High School Athletic Association Women in Sports Leadership Award, and most recently received the Michigan Athletic Director of the Year Award. So without further ado, Meg Seng.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm really happy to be here. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Meg. It is absolutely an honor to have you here today. I first want to begin with thanking Jake Von Scher for the introduction to you. And for those audience members maybe tuning in for the first time, this podcast embodies life, sport, and career. So to first begin, Meg, why don't we start with an introduction?
All right. My name is Meg Seng. I am originally from Chicago. I spent most of my professional career in Ann Arbor at a private school called Greenhills. So I was there for 33 years with a lot of different roles during that time. But originally, like I said, from the north side of Chicago, and grew up in a family of five. And one interesting note about that family, who were sort of sports crazed. I was the second oldest girl. 3 out of 6 children were left-handed, and both of my parents were left-handed. And I think that that's really informed my perspective in a lot of ways.
That is fantastic. You know, Meg, I have to ask you, I am an only child. And so to think about like 6 siblings, that is incredible. So what was the household like, if you will?
It was obviously, there was plenty of chaos. We rarely saw my father. He worked a afternoon shift. So we were at school. He went to work. We went to bed. He came home late. So it was the weekends that we saw him. But he was a huge sports fan. He was a big Cubs fan and a Bears fan. So we grew up watching sports. And my mom was in charge. So, I learned how to be competitive, I would say, from my siblings and certainly from my father. But I think my nature and how I approach things, I definitely got from my mother.
That is wonderful. And when you speak about sport, especially at such a young age, how did that would obviously influence you to be able to then play sports in your collegiate career at Indiana University, Bloomington. So could you walk the audience through how you would focus then on particularly volleyball and softball in college?
Yeah, well, I was actually I never played organized sport until I got to high school, and that was in 1973. So 1 year after the passage of Title IX, I went to a well-resourced high school. I had a high-power, highly successful coach who coached me in 3 sports. I played 3 sports in high school. So I learned to play volleyball from her. I had never played that sport. Baseball, softball, I had grown up playing. And she actually was a fantastic coach. And as I look back at what it takes to be a good coach, she had every single quality, you name it, and she did it. So she also made some calls for me down to Indiana to talk about my strengths as an athlete. I was a walk-on in 2 sports at Indiana, received scholarship after one season, but just at that time, there were not that many scholarships. So I was thrilled to get one, and even more thrilled just to be able to play organized sport. It was a great experience.
That is wonderful. And Meg, we share something in common. I was a walk-on too at the University of Florida for gymnastics. And what was so interesting was is I look at sport. I did play, especially in high school, I played a variety of different sports, but it was always gymnastics that was my true passion. But college, once I got to college and I was able to compete in the sport that I loved the most, you make so many strong bonds with those girls. And what you mentioned, the impact of a coach. I could think both my club coaches growing up, as well as the collegiate coaches I had, both head coach and obviously assistant coaches, they could play such an integral and a positive impact in your life well beyond college. So I'm just curious, what type of lessons would you learn in college playing sports as well as maybe the influence your coaches had on you?
Well, I sung the praises of my high school coach, but we really should go back to her because she ended up becoming a college coach. She ended up at University of Oregon, and then she went on to become an administrator, and now works for the Women's Sports Foundation. So she was totally high power, really did things well. But what a lot of people don't know is that one of our years, she went off to this institute in the summer. We didn't know. We were just, a bunch of kids that wanted to play for her, and came back with this whole new mindset. And so she taught me PMA, positive mental attitude. And she really just then, she innovated with this entire philosophy. And she taught me how to set goals, how to visualize, right, and affirmations. And we did that as a team, and all of our teams, all of those sports. She did that, and those were some fantastic skills. And probably one of the best byproducts of all those was she taught me time management and how to set a calendar and how to follow through. So really high achieving stuff. So I will say that when I got to college, not only was I prepared academically, I was prepared to really, just continue to achieve and continue to work on my skill set. And, it's funny, Carol Dweck came out with her mindset book, The Growth Mindset. And I remember I read it right away as soon as it came out, and I just didn't get it. I was like, well, doesn't everybody have a growth mindset? Like, and I got the fixed part, but I was like, but no, you can, I think my mom taught me that, like, you can always get better, right? So in college, you're traveling with that same group, but you're making sure that you're studying and you're managing that. And to be fair, my social circle were my teammates, right? Like, we didn't get out and do a whole lot more, as you well know. So, but they're all quality people and high achieving people. So I feel really blessed that throughout my career, I have been able to surround myself with high achieving people, somebody who was always better than me, right? So I always had somebody to look towards in terms of modeling my behavior.
That is wonderful. And to your point, I do believe having a positive mindset and a positive attitude could help one maneuver those challenges and those obstacles that inevitably are going to come and present themselves at some point. But it's true. I feel sport is extremely powerful to learn the lessons of life. And as you would go on speaking about the lessons to move forward into your career, you would then go on to become an assistant softball coach at Louisiana Tech while also getting your master's in counseling. So could you navigate, help us understand how that transition was with the athletic identity, the student athlete going straight to that assistant coach position?
Well, I think, like a lot of people, your identity is so wrapped up with being an athlete that I was scared. I can remember being a senior in college and just thinking, what am I going to do? And I came out in 1980, and the job market was not that good. And I was just really grateful that I got a call from a former assistant coach, and he called me and said, "You want to come down to Louisiana?" And I trusted him. So that was the first thing, right? It wasn't just somebody calling me to go somewhere because there was an opening. I trusted him. The good thing about that was he didn't really need help. He was sort of self-sufficient. So that was a really good place to learn, because nothing that I could do was really going to screw things up for him, and he knew exactly what he wanted me to do, so I would just execute. He would tell me, I would do it. It kept me connected to sport, which is something that I knew, and so it was more a matter of not stepping away from sport and kind of clinging to it until I found my footing.
Wow. And when you talk about the athletic identity, I know I definitely struggled with it. I had obviously heard the terminology of it, but to your very point, when I was approaching my senior year, of course, a lot of universities and colleges have those career fairs. But the development for me, like as far as confidence, being able to walk up to somebody, and I always speak about this all the time. I never went up to approach professors to even have like a 5 or 10 minute conversation with them. And when I look back, that is the one thing I definitely regret, because once I was done in those 4 years, it really was such a shock. I came home. I graduated in December. Once January hit, all the excitement of graduation was over. And then it was like, what are you going to do next? So I wish I spoke to more people and I had more self-confidence in myself to approach people, just to ask what is out there in sport. Because in my mindset, it was always like only coaching in sport. When in fact, as we all know, coaching is only one occupation within sport, and there's so many more avenues that you could take. So I'm so happy that you mentioned that with athletic identity. I do believe it's a very real thing, and a lot of athletes do struggle with it. So during your time getting your master's degree, what persuaded you to go into counseling?
Well, I had always had an interest in psychology. It's interesting. In Indiana, my degree program was a significant number, like 15 hours of psychology and 15 hours of sociology. So I just had so many courses for my recreation major, which is interesting, right? But they knew, like, you're dealing with people,
Yes.
that was just a natural avenue for me to follow. And at Louisiana Tech, it was also, I knew it was a major, a master's rather, that I could get within the 12 months. So that was important to me as well. I only spent, I wasn't even there for 12 months down in Ruston. So, and then I moved on to something else. So I knew getting a master's was important. And then I had a real interest in those two degree programs.
That's fantastic. And while you were there, obviously we just spoke about it, but you were a coach. Was there anything as far as navigating back into coaching? Was there a particular lesson that now, as you look back in hindsight, that you learned during that coaching stint you had at Louisiana Tech?
I think what we all think of as we get older is that those relationships are so important. And, like you talked about, that you really do have to value those and stay connected to those people, especially if you're an assistant coach. You really have to stay connected if you want to stay at that collegiate level. I figured out that, the college, game wasn't really where I wanted to be. I actually really like teaching skills. I like the basics and the fundamentals. I like taking what I get and then developing team. And so just doing all of the recruiting and that sort of thing, I just really wasn't interested. But I always loved the satisfaction you get with helping someone learn a new skill. So it wasn't long after that I then gravitated to the high school ranks and kind of just found myself there, which is funny because, I went into recreation because I never wanted to be just a PE teacher. Like I resisted that. I didn't want to be a PE teacher. Recreation sounded like it was a little bit more, it was broader, a little bit more adventurous, and it wasn't just a PE teacher. And then I ended up with a whole career really as being a physical educator, which was great. And I liked it. And I probably should have done it from the get-go. Would have been a lot easier. But so be it, right?
That is fantastic. And as you would go on from coaching and from receiving your master's degree, you then transition into becoming a wellness teacher
Mm-hmm.
and a department chair for Greenhills. So, both positions, especially with the administrative side of the department chair side, what lessons maybe from coaching did you pull over into those into that department chair position and becoming a wellness teacher?
Yeah, well, I think a department chair or any administrator is a coach, right? You're the guide on the side. You're just trying to help develop other professionals. You're trying to help them create a network and support them. So that was really important to me. I spent 33 years at the same school. That's pretty unusual. But within that school, I held a couple of different positions, but I can guarantee you, I probably sat on more committees and was a part of more initiatives than anybody else. So, in terms of finding new things, there was always an opportunity for me to grow or to repop myself, as they say. And so I was able to work with some fantastic colleagues who weren't in my department, but by virtue of being a chair, I was, at the table, so to speak, when we were creating policy or deciding how we were going to do things. So I can't say enough about the school I was at. I wouldn't have stayed that long if I wasn't working with some really fantastic people.
No, that's wonderful. And I believe the environment, the people that we surround ourselves with could truly impact our lives. And how, like, as you would move forward from becoming a wellness teacher and department chair, you then would move into the athletic director position for over 20 years. Now, I have so many questions to ask you, Meg. As an AD, what are some traits or characteristics maybe that you look for when hiring coaches or administrators?
Right. So good, right? I mean, because you ask them about coaching and they'll start telling you right away. If they start talking about people and the impact they want to have, then you've got somebody with some potential. If they're talking about, obviously, if they're talking about wins and losses right off the bat, that's a bit of a flag. But if they're also just talking about their sport, um, then you have to kind of proceed with caution. And so, we have a lot of different questions we ask, but I had the opportunity at my school where we wanted to hire teacher coaches, and that's not as common today as it certainly was when I went to school. We had all teacher coaches, but at my school, we believed in that. I had a leader who believed in that, and so I got to interview every teacher candidate. Didn't matter what they were applying for. It could be a foreign language, it could be the arts, whatever. And so I always got a little bit of time to interview, and I always said, what do you coach? What do you want to coach? And it became a joke, right? People sort of prepped them and said, she's going to ask you what you want to coach. And, some people like, there's no way. That was the last thing they were ever going to do. But it was interesting to see if they would just say, yeah, not me, or if they'd say, I'll do anything, right? So
Wow.
interesting to see that. But yeah, you definitely listen to who's interested in people versus who's
Right.
interested in the results.
No, and I think that's so important because obviously, as we just mentioned, how a coach could play such a positive impact in someone's life. I know, even present day, I always stay in touch with my coaches, like I said, club coaches as well as collegiate coaches. And the one thing I feel, as I would go on is even just providing opportunity. That was number one. When I look back, being able to walk on to that University of Florida team, that literally was could have totally changed the trajectory of my life had I not been able to be on that team. And then
Right.
also the passion that my club coaches had. I mean, they were in the gym. We all were in the gym for like 5 to 6 hours a day.
Right.
And I think to myself, I mean, they're away from their families, and to be able to develop an athlete, like I said, Monday through Fridays, I mean, just constantly in the gym right after school. But I really admire someone who has just such sheer passion for what they do. And so in your AD position, obviously it comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility. But was there ever, like, as you look back, like a challenge that really stood out that you learned from in that position?
Well, I mean, there were plenty of those challenges, right? But I think more of, I mean, certain there's challenges with athletes, there's challenges today with parents, but challenges with coaches when there were value differences, that became really difficult. And I think some of the tough things, like I always think, it's really gratifying to teach somebody and to see them develop. And that's one of the things that I love about education, is that we can be really tolerant. You can give lots of second chances. But when you found that you were really just disagreeing on basic values, then that gets right down to your philosophy and mission. So there are some difficult conversations that I had to have with coaches. There were times where I had to remove coaches, sometimes for cause, and sometimes just because I didn't feel like they were the right person, and I didn't feel like our athletes were getting the best experience. And that's really the way I looked at it. It wasn't about a personality difference. It was more so about, are our athletes, our student athletes, getting a good experience with this person? So
Certainly.
that was, those are some tough times. And I think that we find like we're pretty conflict avoidant in education. It's easy for us to kind of, avoid having those difficult conversations. And certainly in my later years, I realized it's so important to have the difficult conversation, and that once you get through it, everything is just so much cleaner and smoother and better for everybody. Sometimes people are in education and you know what? They shouldn't be, and so the sooner we figure that out, the better. So I think in my career, I put a lot of systems in place. So from the hiring process to the evaluation process and so on. I did a program with our captains every year so that I was giving them leadership skills, because it's really something that doesn't happen across the board. And if it's really inconsistent, again, that speaks to the experience that your student athletes are having. So I think I was able to put a lot of systems in place at my school that kind of helped us avoid major downfalls.
No, that's wonderful. And over your span of 20 years, what was something? I mean, obviously things are always changing, they're always evolving. Was there anything that really would stand out in those 20 years that you had to maybe adapt to?
Well, over those 20 years, things started coming at us faster and furiously, right? So, certainly the digital age, when we started before that, where literally I was on the phone every day, all day, and then email is a godsend, but also, it's sort of a problem. So, but I think with that came the rising tide of anxiety, right? So that's what we're dealing with now. So while there was, so much good, the speed and volume at which things, came at us. And then certainly for kids, the increase in the number of choices they now have. There's just a lot of noise out there, and so sometimes kids they're not interested in playing a sport, or they find something else to do, or they want a new sport that you're like, no, we can't add that sport, right? Like, we're not going to play Quidditch, sorry.
Yes.
So
No, you mentioned so many things. So a couple of things that really stood out was the communication and the modes of communication that we now have.
yeah.
I could only imagine. I mean, I truly remember, this really stands out to me, but in college, I was there from 2006 to 2010, and text messaging was definitely going, but I was kind of late to pick everything up. But I'll never forget it. Towards the latter part, like in 2010, I remember calling my friend and, just to have a conversation, like nothing serious, no emergency or anything. And they pick up the phone. They're like, "Why are you calling?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"What do you mean?" Like, I'm just,
Yeah.
want to talk. But the point is it was in that very moment that I realized our communication was changing and how people were now starting to gravitate towards a sheer text message in comparison to picking up the phone. And so I'm just so happy that you mentioned that, because I am such a fan of communication in person. If I could
Yeah.
sit down with you, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's
um,
something that, yeah, we're losing it to some extent. And so I would love for us to get back to face communication. I think it's really important.
I think it's important. And I think too, you could read somebody's body language. I mean, there's been
Yeah,
so many times, through a text message, somebody could easily misinterpret what you're saying, of course.
for sure. For
It
sure.
certainly happened to me.
Yeah.
But it's so true. I'm so happy you mentioned that. And then when it comes to student athletes, and, I always think about how mental health, early 2000s, when I was really at my peak in elite level sports, mental
Hmm.
health was not really spoken about.
Right.
And so, you know what I mean? And so now
Hmm.
it's such a large topic of discussion. So
Yeah.
from your perspective as an AD in that position for 20 years, was there any programs maybe that you implemented, or maybe even just a change in student athletes that you may have seen or you witnessed with mental health?
Yeah, we definitely have seen, just with I mean, the rise of social media brought on the rise of social comparison. And so I think that's been difficult. There's some programs, there's a lot of programs out there, but just getting kids, kids don't just hang out. So getting kids to just hang out with each other like that used to be a thing. And now it's almost like they have to have a reason to get together. Like it's more transactional, like we're going to do this thing as opposed to like, oh, let's just hang out. So I'm glad that at my school we were able to sidestep some of that. But I think that we do have to find ways to get kids to become more comfortable with just hanging out and not comparing themselves. I mean, it's human nature, right? We're always going to compare ourselves, but the stakes have just risen. Like they're just so great, and being wrong is like a capital crime. And on top of that, I think belonging has always been important, but I think it's even more important now. It's almost like it's a binary: you're in or you're out. And especially in social media, you're on the chat, you're not on the chat, you're in the Facebook picture or the Instagram picture, or you're not, right? And then I know, oh, they were hanging out without me, they were doing some things. So that whole connection piece, um, it's amplified, and so I think we have to find a way to sort of right size that. And that's a much bigger issue, but we work to make sure that we're trying to give kids that support, and not allow them to feel like you know this is the end of the world if they don't get this or have that opportunity. So I don't
That's
know.
so
It's
Yeah, that's so true. You were reminding me of my childhood, talking about like connection, playing outside. We
Yeah.
lived on a cul-de-sac, and I'll never forget, there was across the street there was two boys and a girl, and the girl was extremely young at the time, but I could remember it Saturday mornings, the garage door would go up, and there we were riding our bikes constantly, like the whole day. We would even create, obviously, like I said, I'm playing with boys. So here we are creating like ramps to jump. Dad comes
Yeah.
out like, "Hey, you're going to break your elbow." And so, I have such vivid memories of connection, and you bring up such a good point when you talk about that, like connection and communication, how when you are in person, and especially at a young age, it is so important to develop those conflict resolution skills and being,
Mhm.
even at early ages, 10, 12, because I really do believe if you're in person, you could see body language and you could overcome such an easy conflict versus if you're not in person. And
Right.
so when you talk about social media too, there's so many pros and there can be some cons when it comes to social comparison. And
Yeah.
so I just my like greatest hope was, as I look back at my early years, developing that self confidence early
Hmm.
on. I know I
Yeah.
was very grateful for my father. He really instilled in me, just like it was really a positive perspective. Even if you had a bad day, it was being able to overcome that. And I think that's what kind of really provided that confidence that would be instilled to maybe overcome what would be present day if you add social media into the mix, to be able to overcome that social comparison consistently.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that up. Now, as you would move on to, it was actually during your time as AD, and you currently hold the position, if I understand this correctly, you are the executive director for the Academy for Sport Leadership. Meg, I am so excited to get to this point. Please enlighten our audience. How did you come up with this? What influenced you to co-found this?
Well, it really, I came of age as a leader and an administrator with this program. And so at my school, we had a social studies teacher who taught ethics. And there was a long time study by Acosta and Carpenter's, a longitudinal study about the increase in athletic opportunities and participation of girls, and at the same time, the decrease of the number of female coaches. And so she saw that and she came to me and she said, "We need to do something about this." And I thought, "You're not even a coach. Like, what are we going to do?" And so I got together some of the like minded women, other athletic administrators in the Ann Arbor area, and we started this program, the Academy for Sport Leadership. And our sole mission was to increase the number of female coaches. And it was a grassroots program. So we ran it statewide. And, I have a lot of connections with athletic administrators across the state. So we have some great allies. And we literally invited high school girls, juniors was the target age. We thought a little bit younger and they weren't mature enough, a little bit older and they're already leaving. So junior year, we invite you to Ann Arbor for a camp. So it's like sports camp that everybody went to, but this is coaches camp. And we created mentors in their home community. So after camp, they could go back and they could be an intern coach in their own community, either through their recreation program or their middle school or elementary school with a mentor coach. And it was, we're actually, most of us are aging out. So I am looking for somebody to take over this program. We've been looking for a while, but it still exists. And, we had a great run in terms of running camp every year, and I would bring in speakers, coaches from the University of Michigan or Eastern Michigan University would come and speak to the campers. We would take them on tours, and they would learn all the skills that you would learn as a coach that was non-sport specific. So we taught them team building, and we taught them about creating a philosophy and a culture within their program. And we certainly we got them certified in CPR and first aid as part of the program. We did job placement activities, like we created a resume, and we did a mock interview, which they were petrified of, but we did it. So it was really fun for me. And it was also really good for me to take a good look at coaching and what are the standards of coaching and what are the best practices, put it into a curriculum, but it informed how I work with my own coaches on staff at Greenhills. So that was just mutually beneficial. And I've always been a team sport person. I always played team sports. So I had a group of women who were my team. And it was like so much fun.
I just love that. I wish I had something like that back in high school,
Right?
simply to open up your eyes to what truly is out there. Because
Mhm.
another thing, too, I feel a lot of students, including myself, when I entered into college, I kind of just like looked at the curriculum as far as majors,
Right?
and I was floating around the whole communication college for like 4 years until I actually had to pick a major, right? Or I would have been there for 8 years. And so I wish that there was something early in high school, at least to like open up your mind to say, hey, this
Yeah.
is what's out there. And
Hmm.
then the time spent and the effort exerted towards that major in college becomes extremely valuable as you
Hmm.
move forward. So I
Right.
love that. And I think like when you were speaking about it too, it's not even just about sport that you were focused on, but building like life skills, team building as a leader, and
Hmm.
being able to witness or to understand how to interact with others as far as different types of personalities. I
Yeah.
think that's critical at such a young age. So, talk about fulfillment for you to be able to co found this and to see the impact. How long has this particular like organization, how long has it been going for?
So we organized in 2001. I think we ran our first camp in 2002. We obviously shut down camp during COVID.
Right.
And we would have a small cohort, and it's an intensive program. So it's not like a sports camp where you can have 200 people. So it was always, like a classroom. So it was more of a classroom setting, and it was amazing because we would draw from across the state. So all of a sudden, these girls would all of a sudden they'd be coming to Ann Arbor, going, "Wait a minute, I don't know anyone." We try to get them to come in pairs, so they at
Sure.
least had one person. But one of the things we did was we took them to a ropes course, and we figured out by accident, because the only time the ropes course was available in our first or second year was like the first day. And so we took this group who didn't know each other to the ropes course. And by that afternoon, we had a bonded group. It was amazing. And we are like, we are brilliant. And so we knew from then on, always do the ropes course first, right? Like do the team building at the very beginning is sort of a meta thing. Like this is a group too, and we're trying to create a culture, even if it's just for a few days. So that was really fun. But to see these young women come together and bond. And a lot of them have stayed in touch. And now that isn't thanks to social media. But yeah, so it's a great opportunity, and just seeing that. And, it's hard to keep track of young people like that because then they do go off to college. But I know from myself, I would always, put forward a couple of candidates to come to camp. And I've hired many of them over the years. So then they came back and I hired them in a paid position to coach for me. So I know it was successful in that right. And the confidence that somebody, like you said, so young, who said, yeah, I can be a coach, because we know that's one of the things about women, right? Is they defer and they're like, oh no, I can't do it. People who played collegiate sports, competed at that level, I said, nah, I'm probably not good enough. So that's one of the things we're trying to overcome. So it's great for them to come out of an experience like that saying, yeah, I can do it.
Wow, Meg, I really admire what you've done in Michigan. Have you ever thought of extending it out with all the success that it's had?
Yeah, I mean, I often get people saying, "Oh, that would be great. I wish we had that." And it's pretty time intensive, so that's been the thing. But like I said, I am looking for somebody to take over, and we have a budget, we have money, we have a foundation that supports it. So it's actually a really good enterprise. And so I'm hoping that I can find somebody, since I'm retired, who's got the same sort of passion. And that's what we figured out, right? It's like everything, it's about the people. So, yeah, no, I think it's a good model, and I think it can be replicated. So, I'm happy to share that with anybody who's interested.
No, absolutely. Well, to the audience, you heard it here first. I'm so excited as you would move on. You are now embodying the role of an adjunct professor at Eastern Michigan University. This has to be so exciting, Meg, for you to be able to share your experience. And I want to know, I guess, first off, what is the title of the class? And then what has been the experience so far in the classroom?
It is so much fun. And I've taught 3 semesters so far, and it's been 3 different classes, so 3 different probs. But it's in sport management, so some was just interscholastic administration, one was a coaching class, and then one was specifically on leadership, and that was one of the foundation classes, which they'll probably have me teach again this winter. So really fun to be back in the classroom again. Certainly to be with, motivated young people. That's been really exciting. And it's just so nice to be able to, I've got nothing to prove, and I'm just really there to help them develop. But also, I hope to kind of instill some excitement and passion in their degree program. So that's been fantastic.
That is wonderful, Meg. And when you talk about leadership too, like in that specific class, is there any words of advice that you typically give students, just broadly speaking, maybe about leadership?
Yeah, I try to really focus and get them. We do a lot of exercises early on, so they're sort of like personality things and just self awareness and getting them to know what their values are. We do a lot with values so that they can become adept at building culture within their programs, but then also get them to understand what their strengths are and get them to lead from their strengths. And so I really focus on that. I certainly tell all of them that I want them to be successful and that I know that they can be successful if they want to, and that they really should, not look at it from a deficit, position, but to just go with their strengths and surround themselves with good people. That's important.
I think that's so important. What you just said is really honing in on your strengths. Because
Mhm.
if I could go back when I was lost, when I was right out of college, if I would have
Mhm.
done maybe an assessment, like you said, or like to
Right.
understand what your values are, what you're actually good at, that could really save someone a significant amount of time in their life, because then you're more honed in on what you could at least, not only what you're good at, but what you could really excel in at a much quicker rate too as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
um Gosh, that's wonderful. And I just do. I think about teaching. I'm an adjunct professor too, and I love the excitement of the classroom, how
Mhm.
excited the students are to learn about sport. Meg, if I could go back, I didn't even know at the time that sport management was a thing, like an
Right.
undergraduate. I just
Yeah.
thought it was very, it was business, communication, very general, broad. But
Yeah.
if I could go back to know that I could study sport, I mean, how cool is that?
Right. Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
having a great time with that, and really love working with young people and just helping them develop. I mean, it's just something that
Yes.
it's mutually beneficial, right? It's gratifying for me too. So,
Absolutely. And, Meg, with all of your vast experience professionally, I always like to hone in on what are maybe some words of advice looking forward for this next generation that, I mean, even just like broader societal, like perspective, but what could we focus on more of to really help this next generation coming up?
I think that somewhere along the line, and maybe you might know when, but suddenly, like failure has this high cost, right? Like it's a crime to be wrong, and failure is not to be, had or shared or displayed. And so I think one of the great things that my high school coach did was, I told you, she taught us how to set goals. And so we set goals as a team, though, before every contest. And then the next day, not the same, not game day, but the next day, we evaluated those goals. And I think sort of that introspection and reflection and getting people to be comfortable with going back and saying, I did this well, I could do this better. I mean, the beauty of goals is you can change them, right? It's not like you're getting an A or a B. You're not getting graded on your goal. You can change them, and you could say, that was the wrong direction. I'm just getting rid of that goal. I'm going to set a new goal, or we can do better, right? And I can set that goal higher. And that allowed me as an athlete, and when we talk about the growth mindset, like that was just how it was. Of course, I want to achieve and I want to do better. And I felt confident that I could. And so failure was okay. We didn't look at it as failure, right? We just looked at it as a temporary setback or whatever. And it would really serve us well, I think, if we took our strong opinions and just sort of dialed it back and taught people how to fail and take risks and be okay with it. And it wasn't catastrophic if you don't get it. So for me, I just think that would help so much with the anxiety that young people today are feeling. If they just knew that, you're a good person and you can fail and we're all going to be okay.
Meg, that is fantastic. I talk about this all the time in my classes, and this stems from when I was younger. My father would always tell me that never be afraid to fail, no matter what. And that has stuck in my mind to present day. I mean, even present day when I speak with him, hey, Dad, I'm thinking about doing, this new project, XYZ. Court, just remember, never be afraid to fail. If something goes wrong, you just, kind of re-navigate, right. Look at what you did wrong, assess it, and move forward. And I think to your point, where it could have potentially gone wrong is this idea of if you fail, it could be, all over social media. And yeah. I think like not, any research behind this, but to be able to see like how it could be, it can make somebody very anxious to take that next step. And I have actually spoken to coaches too, as well, where the first thing that they tell their athletes is never be afraid to make a mistake here. Make the mistakes here, because then you're able to learn so much more. You stretch right. your ability and your potential as to what you could achieve out there. And so in the classroom, when I say this, Meg, besides entrepreneurship and sport, if you walk out of that room with one massive message, it really is, especially with entrepreneurship, never be afraid to fail. So I'm right. so happy that you mentioned that, Meg. And, as we round out, do you have a positive message that you could leave the audience with? I love positive quotes, positive messages.
And I'll just tack on to your last comment. I have a friend who coached Division I women's basketball, and so I had the opportunity to watch her coach and practice a few times. And one of her favorite sayings to her athletes would be, make a different mistake. So in other words, you keep making that one, so I'm not happy, but making mistakes is okay. So make a different mistake. And I really like that. It was kind of funny that she did that. For me, I think that whole, the sense of belonging, we talked about the human connection, those types of things. I think that's important. And so one of my favorite quotes is, we are all just walking each other home, right? So we all have a starting point. We all have an end point, and we are in this together. We're human beings. We're interconnected. We all want to belong, and that's important. And so I just really like the notion of walking each other home, because it connotes that sense of community, of safety, support, right? And taking care of one another. So regardless of what your path is, somebody should always walk you home.
Meg, I love that. I have never heard that, the way that you spoke about belonging and community just now. That is such a powerful quote that I really want to use. I'm definitely going to quote you for that, Meg. But it really is. I think that's so important because when you look at the big picture in life, we are all going through life on our different paths. But at the end of the day, you're always going to need support, and how important and how impactful community could be. We all, as human beings, are going to experience very challenging times in our lives, as well as, maybe issues that arise. And today, it seems like what we project out is only the positive highlight of our lives, but when in fact somebody could really be hurting inside underneath it all. And so to be mindful of that, and like you said, just to walk everybody home together and build that community and sense of belonging. Thank you so much for mentioning that, Meg, is just that importance of community. But Meg, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the Plenty of Positivity podcast.
Yeah, this has been great.
Thank you so much, Meg. And it really was. It was an honor to have you on and to be able to learn from you, and all the wisdom and knowledge that you possess in athletics has been, like I said, just truly an honor. So thank you so much, Meg, for being on this podcast.
Thank you, Courtney. I enjoyed it.